Blue or black? Okay.
Everybody may be seated.
Sorry. Put it right there and I'll sit. I didn't hear. Sorry.
My name is Judge Tom Innes, and I'll be overseeing this case, presiding over this case. I'd like the plaintiffs and defendants to introduce themselves. And the one will plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon. My name is Meyer, and I'm joined by Ms. Claire.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Today's
I didn't spell your last name.
that's Meyer. Would you like hers as well, Your Honor?
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Aniyah Nelson, and today I, alongside my colleague, Mr. Alex Lee,
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
we represent the city of Philadelphia in today's proceedings.
Tell me your last name again.
Hubbard, Your Honor.
Okay. And can we find out who all these people are in my court? Are you watching? And where are you all from?
They're not supposed to tell you what school you're at.
University of X. Okay, thank you. All right, so we already have sequestration in effect,
Yes, Your Honor.
and would plaintiff, do you have any pretrial motions or anything?
Yes, Your Honor. Before trial, both sides came together and had a very productive meeting, came to some agreements. First and foremost, we'd like to move Exhibit 1, a picture of the decedent.
And that's stipulation.
Your Honor, we agreed with them prior to trial.
And second of all, Your Honor, there's a video we're going to be using today, listed as Exhibit 40. Both sides have agreed that can come in without objection as well, so we move that.
All good. Anything else? Any other pretrial matters you want me to deal with?
Nothing from us, Your Honor.
Nothing from us, Your Honor.
Plaintiff, would plaintiff like to open the issue?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor. Ms. Nelson, Mr. Lee, members of the jury, they saw the danger, but they didn't stop it. It's a cold night in January of 2025. And in a small municipal building, there's someone with their eyes glued to the television screen. See, earlier that night, the Philadelphia Eagles, they just punched their ticket to the Super Bowl. But that person? Well, they're not watching game highlights. No. Because the person with their eyes glued to the screen is a city official, the director of public safety. So he's watching the crowd celebrate on the news. Now, the Philadelphia sports fans, they're out in force. They're flipping cars, they're breaking windows, and they're climbing up the lampposts that line the city streets. Now, usually, there's a method that this director uses to stop them from climbing those posts. See, if you cover them in grease, they become difficult to scale. But this time, for the first time in over a decade, they don't grease those poles. And for the first time in over a decade, someone climbs, falls, and dies. 2 weeks later, just 2 weeks, it's the Super Bowl. And that city has an opportunity to right that wrong, to put that grease back on those poles, but he chooses not to. So when Jalen Hurts catches that final ball, when the Philadelphia Eagles win, and all of those citizens, they spill out into the streets, they climb those posts again and again someone falls and crushes a young man named Sam Farnsworth. They saw the danger, but they didn't stop. And that's why we're here. Mr. Farnsworth's family is filing of negligence against the city of Philadelphia. As the plaintiff, we have a burden to prove two things to you today. That the city of Philadelphia breached their duty of care to Mr. Farnsworth, and that breach, that's what led to his death. We have to prove those things to you more than not. It's a preponderance of the evidence, and to do so, we're going to ask you to focus on three key facts. They knew about the danger. They knew how to stop it, and they chose not to. So let's start with that first fact. They knew the danger. Because today you're going to learn that the city knew ahead of time when people spilled out into the streets, they were going to climb those posts. You'll hear testimony from the person who fell on Mr. Farnsworth, and he'll tell you about the long tradition of the city of doing so. You'll learn that this was no surprise that it was dangerous, because on the Super Bowl, well, 2 weeks earlier, somebody had just died doing it. But that brings us to our second fact. They knew how to make it safe. Today, you're going to hear testimony from that safety director. He's going to tell you that they had a flawless record considering those polls when they did one thing: grease them. But he's going to look you in the eyes and he's going to tell you that for the first time they didn't, and for the first time they suffered the consequences. And they did it again. And that brings us to our third point, that they didn't stop the danger. Members of the jury, today you're going to hear how easy it would have been to stop that danger. You're going to hear that it would have been cheap and feasible, but they decided not to do it anyways. And because of that, Mr. Farnsworth died. Look, we expect the defense to come up here and tell you that greasing those poles, it wasn't a perfect solution. But the law doesn't demand perfect. It demands reasonable. And today you're going to see that taking away that precaution that had saved lives for a decade, for the second time in a row, reasonable. They saw the danger, but they didn't stop it. And that's why at the end of today's trial, I'll come back before you ask to find the city of Philadelphia liable.
Opening from the defense, Your Honor. May I proceed? May it please the court, Mr. Meyer, members of the jury. They put up barriers, but she chose to cross them. It's February 9th of 2025. And a young man is standing on a street corner right outside of this very building after a night of drinking with his friend. And he's screaming. You see, his friend just decided to climb up a light pole that was over 15 feet tall. And as his friend steps over the metal barriers around that pole, he's screaming, "Stop." As his friend walks to the bottom of that pole, he's screaming, "Stop, don't do it, don't climb." As his friend reaches the top of that pole, he's screaming, "Stop, don't do it, please come down." Let's listen. And when his friend chooses to ignore his cries for help, his cries to stop, to come down, well, that's what his worst fear is realized. Because while his friend is at the top of that pole, suddenly she slips, falls, knocks him backwards, and his head goes slamming into the metal fence behind him. And as his blood seeps into the concrete just below his body, he takes his final breath. Members of the jury, that man's name was Sam Farnsworth. And on that night, back in February, he died. And when Mr. Meyer got up here to speak with you just a moment ago, he told you that the reason that Mr. Farnsworth died because the city saw the danger, but they just didn't stop. But members of the jury, today will show you that that's not true. That the city took countless steps to protect every single resident. But that even though the city took those steps, Mr. Farnsworth's friend, Lanny Davidson, ignored them. That the city put up barriers, but she chose to cross them. And that's a problem for the plaintiff in today's trial. Because when they walked through those courtroom doors and brought this lawsuit against the city of Philadelphia, they took on the first burden of proof. Today, it's the plaintiff's responsibility to prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence, or just more likely than not, that the city of Philadelphia breached its duty of care, that they didn't act reasonably to protect the residents of the city during that Super Bowl celebration in February. But members of the jury are not going to be able to meet that burden today. Because today, the city did take steps to protect its residents. We're actually going to call the Director of Public Safety to stand, Mr. Walker Evans. He'll tell you about all of the steps that the city took leading up to that Super Bowl celebration in February. He'll tell you that the city added free public transportation, that they put metal fences around those light poles, that they cleared streets. He'll tell you about all the steps that they took, that they added police, every single thing that they did to make sure that those streets were safe. But today you'll learn that Lanny Davidson ignored all of those barriers that the city put up. And that's where our case comes into play, because today we're pursuing something called an affirmative defense. It's called comparative negligence. What that means is that today it's our responsibility to prove to you that it's more likely than not that Lanny Davidson is the person who didn't act reasonably on the night of February 9th. So we're here to show you that. We'll ask you to focus on things. First, that the city put up barriers. And second, that she chose to cross them. Now, we already talked about a bit about the barriers that the city put up, so let's move into that second one. That Lanny Davidson chose to cross. Now, Ms. Davidson is actually going to take the stand in just a few minutes. And I expect that on cross-examination, she'll be forced to admit that when she stood at the bottom of that hole, her friend screamed at her to stop, but that ultimately she made the decision to cross over that metal railing, to climb up that hole, that she made the decision to ignore those barriers that the city put up. So members of the jury, over the course of today's trial, I want you to keep in mind that the city put up barriers, but Lanny Davidson chose to cross them. That's why at the end of today's trial, I'll come before you again. I'll ask you to find the city of Philadelphia not liable. Thank you.
Thank you.
So for the purpose of the ballot, the government attorney's the plaintiff, and then the defense is the defense attorney, because all the judges, it's an old form for. Yeah, that's confusing.
I just wanted to be clear. Plaintiff counsel, want to call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor, the plaintiff or government calls Lynn Davidson.
Call you. They're representing the government.
Sounds good, Your Honor.
Stop being confused. Come on up.
Good afternoon.
Exactly.
Would you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hi, I'm Lenny Davidson.
Ms. Davidson, where are you from?
Right here. Billy.
Do you know someone named Sam Farnsworth?
I did.
How'd you know him?
He was my best friend.
How close were the two of you?
We didn't start out close. We went to different schools for undergrad. But we did the same extracurricular, and then we started calling each other, and then texting each other, and then we'd go out to dinner, and then he was my best friend.
I want to give the jury the chance to meet Mr. Farnsworth. Would you recognize a photograph?
I would.
Your Honor, I'm approaching this mountain with what's already been entered as Exhibit 1, and the witness in turn with the same. Of course, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor. Here you are. What did I just hand you?
This is a picture of Sam.
Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, he was studying philosophy at the University of Chicago. He wanted to go into academia. He was really passionate.
Were you there with him when he died?
Yeah. I was.
Where were the two of you?
We were on a street corner, just nearby. We were celebrating the Super Bowl.
I want to walk through that day piece by piece to give the members of the jury a better view of what was happening. Where were the two of you watching that Super Bowl game?
We were in a bar. They had screens. I'd flown in to come watch it with it.
Were the two of you drinking alcohol?
Yeah, it was game day.
How much were you?
I don't know if I have an exact number. I wasn't keeping tally, but pretty normal for a celebration.
Can you tell us who won that game on those bar screens?
It was the Eagle.
What did you do when the Eagles won the Super Bowl?
Same thing all of us do every Billy wins. We all went into the street. No one even had to tell us what to do. It was just like everyone knew what to do.
When you went out into the streets, did you ever approach a lamppost?
I did.
What did you do?
I tried to climb it.
What Sam did?
Sam tried to stop me.
What happened?
I started climbing the lamppost, and then I got to the top. I looked down at Sam. I was teasing him. I was saying, "You're next." And then I started to climb down, and that's when I slipped.
Can you tell us about the moment you fell?
It was awful. I started falling, but I didn't hit the concrete. I fell on Sam. And when I got up, I thought he was okay, and then I started kicking him. And he picked it up.
I want to talk about if the city could have predicted an accident like this. Then, have you ever seen people climb lampposts like this before?
Yeah.
Have you seen videos of them doing it?
Over time, yeah, 4 or 5 maybe.
Then, would you recognize the video you were shown before trial listed as Exhibit 40?
I'm sure I would.
This is the video we entered in pre-trial. I'm going to play it now. And as I show you this video, I want you to be able to remember what happened and how many climbers there were. Does that make sense?
It does.
All right, here we go. Ma'am, what was taking place on that video with Charles?
There was a big crowd of people, it was the populated one. And they were throwing things in the air, shooting things, smoke into the air, and just, there's a massive crowd.
How many people scaled that pole in that short video?
Lottery.
Man, have you seen news stories like this before showing people climbing those poles?
Yeah, it's kind of the tradition here, everyone does it after games.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation, may I be heard?
Sure.
Your Honor, this witness just testified that climbing poles is something that everyone does after games. Your Honor, that's the witness stepping into other people's mindset, talking about what everyone in the city does. It's speculation.
Yes, Your Honor. This is not a speculative statement. She's speaking from her rationally based perception. Instead of her saying this is what everybody thinks after games, she's specifically talking about what she saw with her own eyes, them climbing the poles.
The objection is sustained. You can, if you want to lay that foundation, so she can testify to that, then I would revisit that.
Move to
Yeah,
strike
sure.
that testimony.
Stricken, like you can, you're welcome to ask the question.
Man, with your own eyes, have you seen people climbing poles before?
I've been in Philly and we've gone before, yeah, you.
Then I want to talk about what the government did and didn't do to prevent this. Man, when you walked up to that pole, was there a protected barrier?
Really barrier was the small fence.
That small fence, was it difficult for you to step over?
No.
Did it stop you from climbing that pole?
No, it was small enough that I could stand on it to climb.
Okay, if not that fence, what about police? Did you see police there that day?
I saw a few officers when I came out of the bar.
Did any of them tell you don't climb that pole?
I didn't hear anyone say anything like that.
When you started climbing, did you hear anybody say get down?
Just saying. No.
Then I want to talk about grease. Man, when I say greasing the poles, do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah, starting in about 2018, the city started adding grease to the poles so that people couldn't climb it when we.
Have you seen that grease with your own eyes?
Yeah,
When?
celebration in 2022, all the poles were greased that day.
Now, in that celebration in 2022, when the poles were greased, did you climb them?
No, I couldn't.
What about the Super Bowl 2025? When the poles greased that day?
No. There's no grease on the pole.
Then if there was grease on that pole, you still climbed it?
No. I wouldn't have been able to. I would have gone to the top. I wouldn't have fallen on sand.
Objection or just speculation, may I be heard? Your Honor, this witness just testified that had there been grease on the pole, she wouldn't have been able to climb it, she wouldn't have made it to the top, she wouldn't have fallen on sand. Your Honor, that's this witness speculating as to a hypothetical, is it admissible?
May I respond, Your Honor? This witness is just talking about what they themselves would be able to do. In the same way that I can tell you I could or couldn't run a mile in a certain time. Talking about what your own abilities are isn't stepping into the mindset of somebody else.
Response, Your Honor?
Quickly.
We on a faith basis that this was the first time this witness had ever climbed a pole. For her to say that had there have been grease, she wouldn't have been able to make it to the top. That is her speculating. She doesn't have the personal knowledge to testify to that.
Ma'am, had you ever climbed a pole?
No, I had not.
Move to strike that testimony.
Yes, Your Honor. Did you climb that pole with grease on it?
When I climbed, didn't have any grease on it.
Thank you. Your Honor, that'd be perfect.
Thank you. Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed? Good afternoon, ma'am. I want to start by talking about what you do when you climbed that pole and what you did. Now, starting with what you did. Ms. Davidson, when you were standing at the bottom of that pole, you knew that you'd never climbed a light pole before, right?
I thought about it back in that 2022 celebration, but this was the first time.
That's right, ma'am. You knew you'd been drinking for 11 hours, right?
Sam and I met up earlier that day. Yeah, that sounds right.
So that's 11 hours, ma'am, true.
11 or so. Yes.
And ma'am, like you said just a moment ago when you were speaking to Mr. Meyer, well, you don't even remember how many drinks that you had, do you?
I wasn't keeping a tab on how many. I had about what was regular for me on day to day.
So ma'am, your first time climbing the pole, you were drinking for 11 hours. Ma'am, do you have extensive rock climbing experience?
Not extensive. I've been rock climbing before, but no, I'm not a pro climber.
All right, ma'am, so you knew all of that. When you were standing at the bottom of that pole, I want to talk about what you did. Because when you walked up to that pole, there were actually metal barricades preventing you getting to it, right?
There was a small fence in front of where I walked up to the pole.
Let's talk a bit more about that, ma'am. Could you flip to exhibit 36 in that binder and let me know when you're in? 36.
36.
Would your honor like a courtesy copy? Ms. Davidson, this is that light pole that you climbed on that night in February, right?
The one.
Ma'am, when you were standing at the bottom of that pole, you knew that people had been arrested for climbing light poles before, right?
I had seen things.
Objection, Your Honor, to speculation, if I may be heard. Okay. This witness can certainly testify that she's seen people arrested, maybe after they climb the light poles, things like that. But to say why specifically they were arrested goes well beyond her knowledge.
A response, Your Honor. Your Honor, this doesn't call for speculation. The witness is free to answer yes or no, whether she knows that people were arrested because of that reason or whether she doesn't.
Your Honor, may I respond? Opposing counsel is asking this witness to make an assumption about whether or not they were arrested for those light poles. They can certainly ask if they were arrested, but to get into the nitty-gritty of the police reports and why that actually happened goes well beyond the knowledge that she can test.
Want to rephrase your question?
Sure, Your Honor.
Your Honor, motion to strike this also. Yes, sir.
Ms. Davidson, you knew that people had been arrested during those celebrations in the city before, right?
Yeah, it was very rowdy. There was.
Ma'am, you knew that someone had died after falling from a light pole, right?
I didn't hear about that.
Ma'am, is it your testimony that you didn't read the article saying that someone died after falling from?
I couldn't tell you what specific articles I read.
Ma'am, would you flip to exhibit 19 in that binder?
Yes, the article from the 16D, that one.
Yes, ma'am, that was right.
I'm here.
Ma'am, you know about the events discussed in that article, true?
Counsel?
Oh, apologies, Your Honor. Okay. Ma'am, you've seen this article. Oh, apologies. Ms. Davidson, you've seen this article before, right?
When Mr. Meyer was asking me questions in my deposition, I think this is one of the articles they showed me.
That's right, ma'am. When you were deposed, you said you were familiar with the events discussed in that article, right?
I wasn't sure if I was familiar with this article in particular. I've seen lots of articles about celebrations before.
Ma'am, they asked you about exhibits 12 through 20, right?
I believe they did.
And you said you were familiar with the events in this article.
The events, the games, sure. I don't know if I've seen this article. before, other than in a deposition.
Well, ma'am, let's talk about what that article says.
Okay.
It's a fair and accurate copy of that article, right?
From what
From when
I,
you were deposed, ma'am.
yes, it's the same one they showed me in my deposition.
It hasn't been changed or altered in any way.
I don't believe so, no.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense offers Exhibit 19 into evidence.
No evidence. Admitted evidence as exhibit 19.
Yes, Your Honor. Ma'am, in that article, it says that someone died after falling from a light pole. True?
Yes, it says, someone named Mr. Muldrow, had fallen and hit his head.
So, ma'am, when you were standing at the bottom of that light, and there were those metal railings in front of you, you chose to step over them, right?
I stepped over the fence.
Ma'am, when you were standing at the bottom of that hole, you chose to climb, right?
I-
Ma'am, you chose to climb that hole even after your friend Sam Farnsworth was screaming at you not to.
I did.
And when you got to the top of that hole, your friend Sam was still screaming at you to come down, wasn't he?
He wasn't screaming at me anymore.
Well, ma'am, as you climbed that hole, he was screaming at you, right?
He told me not to climb before I started climbing. And then the only thing after that was that I looked down to say next, and he just shook his head at me.
Well, ma'am, before you started climbing that hole, when he was screaming at you, well, you ignored his warnings, didn't you?
I climbed the hole anyway.
So, ma'am, if you chose to step over those railings, if you chose to climb that hole, I want to talk about why you're sitting in this chair and not at the defense's table today. Because you were originally a defendant in this lawsuit, right?
Sam's family, named me as one of the defendants, that's right.
That's right, ma'am. Sam Farnsworth's family didn't sue me yet.
In addition to the city, yeah.
But then you decided to settle that lawsuit outside of court, right?
They told me I was just a kid, so they settled with me. They didn't think it was my fault.
Ma'am, I'm not asking you to tell us what Mr. Farnsworth's family thought, but they dropped that lawsuit against you, right?
They did, they dismissed against me.
And you paid them $1, right?
After what happened, yeah, I think. Yeah, that's the agreement.
And after you paid Mr. Farnsworth's family $1, you were no longer the defendant, you were a witness for them in this trial.
That was part of the settlement, that's right.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect, Your Honor.
Really?
You were just asking questions about that settlement. I want the members of the jury to really understand the terms. And is that settlement contingent on what you say on that stand?
No, Sam's family just asked me to go to court and talk about what I saw and what I did.
Then do you know that settlement is contingent on the plaintiff winning?
Not that I know.
Thank you for your time, ma'am. Your Honor, not further.
Counsel, anything further?
No recross, Your Honor.
Well, yeah, be allowed to step down. Thank you. And now approaching Room Committee Exhibit 1.
For defense, you wish to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls for Walker Edwards to the stand.
Mr. Edwards? Good afternoon.
May I proceed?
Sure.
Good afternoon, sir. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
I don't.
Sir, can you tell them what your name is?
Oh, my name. My name is Mr. Edwards, and I am the Director of Public Safety for the city of.
Sir, can you tell us a bit about what responsibilities you have as the Director of Public Safety?
Well, part of my responsibility is making sure everyone stays safe. So I'm the guy who organizes the parades, I'm the guy with police in certain areas, I'm the guy trying to make sure everything moves smoothly.
Mr. Edwards, how'd you originally get into that job?
Well, originally I didn't live in Philadelphia. I actually lived in New York. I wanted to make sure I got into public safety. It was important to me. And Philadelphia reminded me a lot of where I grew up as, a place that I thought I could really make better. So I came here.
Mr. Edwards, why are you here in court today?
Oh, I'm here in court today because just this past February, somebody died during the Super Bowl celebrations in Central City.
Sir, I want to begin by talking a bit more about how the city prepares for those events. How do you typically go about preparing for those large celebrations?
Well, generally the preparation doesn't start the day before, generally as soon as we have a pretty good idea that, say, the Eagles might win it all, we start beforehand. So we, in January, we were thinking about these kind of things. One of the first things we did, get on the phone with the mayor, and different police, and try to coordinate different things.
Well, what concerns do you have during these celebrations?
Mainly concerns about people staying safe, right? So I'm sure if you lived here before, you've seen the videos of people running up on the poles, climbing on top of them, people on cars, people really expressing their love for the Eagles. We'll say that. My job is going to keep them safe.
Sir, do you know if the city assigns any police to the city during those celebrations?
Absolutely. Part of my job is doling out police in different areas of the city to make sure we have pretty good coverage of where anything could go wrong. That's one of the things I did in today's case.
Well, how many police do you typically assign to the city streets?
I like to go for 200 is enough where we can pull out different blocks. So in every 2 city blocks in Central City, I try to put 40 police officers.
Do you know how those officers are assigned to different locations in the city?
Well, literally, we just batch them and we say, we're gonna put down on, let's say, between 10th and 12th Street. We're gonna separate that into 2 blocks and put them all the way between the columns of Central City.
Luther, I want to talk a bit more about what the police actually do during those celebrations.
Absolutely.
Do you mind flipping to Exhibit 6 in that binder? Let me know under there.
Sure.
Sir, do you recognize this document?
Yes, ma'am. This is a police report filed from the Philadelphia Police Department from Super Bowl night.
Would Your Honor like a courtesy copy?
Please.
Mr. Edwards, is this a fair and accurate copy of that police report?
Yes, ma'am. Looks the same as when I last saw it.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense offers Exhibit 6 into evidence.
Your Honor, seeing this as a public record, no objections.
So admitted.
Yes, Your Honor.
Exhibit 6 has been admitted into the record.
Mr. Edwards?
Yes, it's already right.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Edwards, according to this police report, what did this officer do during the post-Super Bowl celebration in Philadelphia?
Well, it looked like he did a lot. Generally, it seems like his job was to go throughout the city and look for problems, look for people that were potentially being unsafe, people that might be injured. In this case, he actually ended up running into who I understand is the decedent in today's case, Mr. Banfalvi.
Sir, does this report mention anything about light poles?
He's looking through the light pole specifically. He says he sees an individual climbing the light pole just outside of here, actually, on 12th Chestnut.
And what did that officer do when he saw that person climbing a light pole?
Well, the officer looks like he says, as soon as he sees him, he starts to run over and he yells, "Hey, get down." And then he continues to run towards him to try to attempt to get the person down from the light pole.
Mr. Edwards, other than trying to get that person down from the light pole, does this report mention any other things that that officer did during that celebration?
It looks like the officer continues, he tries to interview witnesses, he tries to talk to people about what happened, and specifically does all of that in his capacity as a law enforcement officer.
Sir, are the police enough to stop people from climbing light poles?
Well, I can tell you that at least last month,
Was that
or
question
February,
again? Your question again?
It was, do you know if the police are enough to stop people from climbing light poles?
Your Honor, objection to speculation, if I may be heard. Go ahead. This witness can certainly be asked if he's seen people climb light poles while they were police. That's if the police are enough to do X, Y, Z, goes beyond his personal knowledge.
Response, Your Honor? Your Honor, this witness is the Director of Public Safety for the City of Philadelphia. It's his responsibility to organize these events, to manage safety protocols. He's more than able to testify as to whether or not this particular action was enough.
Your Honor, may I respond?
1 sentence.
Yes, Your Honor. Even though he has that role, go ahead. Even though he has that role, it doesn't mean that he can talk about what other people can or can't do, because that's speculation.
Objection overruled, you may continue.
Yes,
Yes,
Your
ma'am.
Honor. So we asked that question. Do you know if the police were enough to stop people from climbing those light poles?
well, I can tell you in February of this year, it weren't. We know that people were still on the light.
So, sir, what steps did the city take to deter people from climbing?
Well, generally, one of the things I wanted to do was install physical barriers to stop people from both being under the light pole and also from trying to access it. So we installed fences around the light poles. We did this for every single one in the central city.
All right, sir, you installed barriers around those light poles. Was there anything else that you did?
Yes, ma'am. One of the things we did to try to make it safer this year was actually take grease off of the light poles.
All right, sir, let's back up for a second. When did the city start putting grease on the light poles?
Well, before this year, we've done it for, nearly a decade. Because part of the idea was maybe it's a little intuitive. There's grease on the light pole, you can't get all the way up. But this year we found that, well, yeah, you put grease on the light pole, people are more likely to slip. Makes it a hazard.
So, sir, when did you stop putting grease on those light poles?
We stopped doing it this year in January 2025.
All right, so you mentioned that you stopped putting grease on the light poles. I want to show you a video. Exhibit 39, if I showed it to you.
Sure.
Your Honor, I'm now approaching the witness. With exhibit 39, it's a video. We're going to be starting it at the 14th. Sir, can you just tell us what's happening in this video as it plays?
You want to talk over it?
Sure.
Sure. Yep, so right there, that's downtown Central City. People are very excited. Looks like it's after a sports game. I think this is baseball. And someone is climbing on top of a light post. He looks a very great Flyers fan.
Mr. Edwards, was that when the poles were greased or ungreased?
That was when they had grease on them. Part of the rationale is, well, if people are able to still get up on them with grease, we surely don't want the grease to be the reason that it fell.
Sir, was that a fair and accurate copy of that video that I showed you?
Yes, ma'am.
Had it been changed or altered since the last time you saw it?
No, ma'am, it was the same.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense moves exhibit 39 in evidence.
Your Honor, both sides agreed before trial, all objections were made.
All objections.
All objections to exhibit 9 were waived.
So, sir, you talked about those metal barricades. You said that you stopped greasing those poles. Sir, do you think all of those measures are enough to protect all residents of the city?
It's tough to do everything possible to protect everybody. But part of my job is to do the best I can. And what I try to do is balance cost, right? Because we only have so many resources that the city will give us, along with keeping people safe. So the physical barriers, along with the way we handle taking the grease off, I think we did a great deal to help from happening.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Cross.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Edwards, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, how you doing?
Not too bad, sir. Thanks for asking. Sir, I want to start by talking about your experience today.
Yes, sir.
like you told us, you're in charge of safety for these sporting events.
That's right, yes, sir.
You're the one who makes recommendations to the mayor, how to keep people safe.
That's absolutely right.
In your time working that job, well, you certainly noticed we have a pretty intense sporting culture in this city, don't we?
I think I noticed that when I moved here, absolutely.
You saw people start playing bars,
Yeah, that's something, yeah,
people punch out windows.
unfortunately, yes,
Unfortunately, you see people climb landmarks, right?
that's right.
Like you said, when you first moved to the city, well, you started thinking about solutions, how to stop them from doing that, right?
That's right. One of the first things I try to do is figure out how to keep people safe.
And that solution you think that is to grease those poles, true?
Initially, that was the idea, start to grease them.
Then one moment to examine just how effective the solution actually was. Sir, as the director of safety for this city, well, you understand the statistics about how many people were climbing and all, right?
Well, specifically, we have good data on how people were climbing. We don't have great data on how many people were falling.
Let's make a timeline. Okay, 2018 NFC Championships. That's like the Super Bowl qualifier, right?
That's one way to put it, yeah.
Sir, that one way, it was the first time that you would ever grease those.
Sir,
No deaths,
no, sir,
no injuries.
no injuries.
That year's Super Bowl, grease the poles again,
Yes, sir.
no deaths,
Yes, right, sir.
no injuries.
Yes, sir.
Okay, it's 2022, the Phillies, they just broke into the World Series. Sir, you grease those poles again, right?
That's right, sir. This time we changed it from greasing, or we changed it to kind of biodegradable.
Sir, it was grease, right?
Biodegradable oil, sorry, not to.
Sir,
That'd be pretty bad.
you that oil, not fuel,
Not good.
to make those lampposts slippery, right?
That was the idea. Yep, make it more decline.
And again, no injuries, right?
No, not from, any lamp cracking, no. No, sir, no deaths.
2023, we're back at the NFC Championships, right?
That's right, sir.
Grease.
Yeah, we put grease on it. Yep.
No injuries,
Not from lamp post cracking, no.
no deaths, right?
That's right, sir.
I want to talk about when all that. January 2025, so that was 2 weeks before the Super Bowl.
That's right, sir. That's Washington Commanders versus Eagles.
That was the first time that you did it with any kind of grease on those poles for a major sporting event, right?
That's right. That's when we made the change. We decided we were gonna try to, what we thought made it safer.
Hold on, I want to make sure I'm getting this straight. You called the safety precautions you used very effective, right?
They dropped it. Yes, sir.
Let's put that in context. So at each and every one of those games before, you never got more than 15 reports of people climbing, right?
That's right.
Objection to hearsay, may I be heard?
Sure.
Your Honor, at this point, Mr. Meyer is questioning the witness on the number of reports that detail people climbing those poles. Your Honor, those reports, they're hearsay, that out-of-court statements that opposing counsel is offering for the truth of the matter, they're inadmissible.
May I respond, Your Honor? Pursuant to Your Honor's prior ruling, this is within his knowledge in this role. Your Honor, the actual material truth value that's being argued here has already been agreed to by both sides. It's in Exhibit 45, which this witness has seen. Both sides already agreed that this is authentic. Would Your Honor like a copy? It's on the second page of that, I believe, Your Honor. For Your Honor, I'm not using this for, of course, Your Honor. Might be a little bit lower, I can check, Your Honor, just the lines. Down at the bottom, they talk about, it's on the second page. We're looking at line 21. Or rather line 20. Talking about, according to the deposition, in those instances, there was an average of 13 pole climbers, never more than 15, and no one died. And then he goes on to say how many there were in the 25. Thank you. What's the question again? The question was whether or not he had never seen more than 15 reports, and that's true.
Yes, sir, that's true.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. So circle back that number. That was no more than 15 reports ever, right?
That's right. It usually hovers somewhere between 10.
So the first time you took the grease off those poles, That number jumped from 15 to 75 climbers, right?
Yes, sir. The number of climbers increased.
Sir, it wasn't just the number of climbers. It was the number of deaths, right?
Well, sir, yes, unfortunately, in January of this year, we lost a young man from one of those light poles. Yes, sir.
Hold on, sir. For 9 years, Greece after Greece after Greece, you had never seen a single injury from climbing those poles, right?
Not from climbing poles.
The first time you took the Greece slope, you didn't see an injury, you saw a death, right?
That's right, sir.
Sir, 2 weeks later was the Super Bowl, right?
Yep, absolutely correct.
2 weeks later, you had the opportunity to put the Greece back on.
Yep, sir. And we reevaluated the decision, and we still felt we were confident in taking the grease off because of the reduced fall risk. What we're trying to prevent.
So that's a yes to my question. You had the opportunity to put the Greece back on.
That's right, sir.
For the second time, you didn't.
You're right.
For the second time, someone died.
You're correct.
Then let's talk about how reasonable that decision actually was.
Sure.
Sir, when you first came up with the idea to grease those poles, you called up a safety consultant, right?
That's right. I did.
You asked them, is that actually a good idea?
Yep. I wanted to know, well, first, is this a thing people do?
They told you to go ahead, right?
They said, sure, try it. Yep.
And you did try it, right?
That's right, sir.
It was successful, right?
It was successful from keeping people from dying, although we still saw people falling.
And then when you chose to stop greasing those poles, well, you didn't let safety inspector back up, did you?
No, sir. I didn't.
Didn't pull any safety inspector back up, did you?
Nope, I did not, sir.
Sir, you didn't consult any safety data whatsoever, right?
Well, I have the data, obviously, that the city collects, but other than that, no, sir.
I want to talk about why you actually did that. You said it on your direct examination. You said that you had to balance the cost, right?
That's right, sir.
Sir, can you tell the members of the jury how much you were expecting to spend
Specifically in what, sir?
on greasing those poles? You had done it plenty of times in the past.
That's right. Generally, our estimate for greasing the poles in Silver City is about $10,000.
Hold on, $10,000. Over 1 million people live in this city, right?
That's right, sir.
$10,000. That's greasing the poles this time.
That's right, sir.
$10,000, even though somebody died 2 weeks before.
Specifically, yes, sir. The cost and obviously the safety ideas that we had.
Sir, in your own words, you called that grease a waste of money, right?
Yes, sir. Based on the data that we had at that time.
You said it was a waste of money because you only had one fatality in the last decade. True.
That's right, sir.
Sir, you call that pretty good, right?
Yes, I would.
But when we say one fatality in the last decade, what we actually need is one fatality in the last 2 weeks, right?
That would be true. Yes, sir.
So after that Super Bowl, that number flipped to 2 fatalities in 2 weeks, right?
That's right, sir.
Thank you. Your Honor, nothing further.
Redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Edwards, did grease stop people from climbing those poles in the city?
No, ma'am. We found that even when we put grease on, people still managed to climb them. They still managed to get up there.
And in your time as Director of Public Safety, when you were greasing those poles, did the number of climbers go up or down?
We greased the poles.
Yes.
When we greased the poles, the number of climbers did go up.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Briefly, sir, you'd agree with me that 75, it's more than 15, right?
That's right, sir.
Thank you. Nothing further.
I'm sorry, hear that question again.
Yes, Your Honor. We're talking about the comparison.
No, I just want to get.
That number is 75 climbs. It's more than 15 climbs. You're on, right?
75 is better than 15.
Your Honor, nothing further.
Okay, all right, thank you. Anything further?
No redirect, Your Honor. Mr. Edwards can step down.
You said that.
Thank you.
Okay. Lou, how are we running?
We're over out of time, but Your Honor, I believe we're not permitted to take breaks and let everything run.
I need to do that for you, so. There we go. So, Give you a couple minutes to.
So they. Last year was concealed. That's what I did. So I switched 2 years ago. Yeah, we don't fly on time. Yeah, but yeah, Bill is still.
Yeah, how they get you.
What type of law practice?
Thanks. Go. Yeah.
Road, in North Pickle.
Oh. Sounds good. I was the client inspector here last week. He's trying to get those guys. Yeah. it should be correct. Yeah.
Last council, ready to.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor. Members of the jury. They saw the danger. They didn't stop. Very effective. Those two words I want to hone in. See, during the cross-examination of that safety director, I asked him about what happened 2 weeks before the Super Bowl, about cautions. He said they were very effective. So I took him to the map of that. I said, very effective. Hold on just a minute. Wasn't that the event where 75 people climbed those poles? Not just the 50. Yeah. Very effective, he says. And they kept saying, oh, it would stop people from slipping. But hold on, I asked him, isn't that the event where someone died for the first time? Yeah, very effective. That's how we're saving. Members of the jury, when somebody looks you in the eyes and shows you that kind of disregard for safety, take them as a word. Because when you change policy for the first time in a decade and someone dies as a result, you don't pat yourself on the back. You reevaluate. And they did. And a young man named Sam Farnsworth died. Because they saw the danger, but they didn't stop it. And that's why we're here today. And just to instruct you as the plaintiff, we've taken on a burden of proof. We needed to prove it to you by the preponderance of the evidence that's more likely than not that the city breached their duty of care and that breach led to harm for Mr. Farnsworth. And look, both sides agreed that Mr. Farnsworth, he suffered harm. It's undisputed, he died there. So the only thing we're here to answer is whether or not they breached their duty. And if that was the cause. We asked you to follow 3 key facts. And I'd like to walk through them one by one. So first, they saw the danger. Because today you heard from the person who actually climbed that pole, who fell on Mr. Farnsworth's sheet. That climbing poles is something that the city does every single year. That this wasn't unexpected, it was predictable. She even told you what she wouldn't have done if there was grease there. She said, yeah, if there was grease on those poles, of course I wouldn't have climbed them. And the data agrees with her. People didn't. Now, the judge will tell you that one of the things we had to show was how predictable this was. But I want to turn your attention to how predictable it was for the city. Now, they told you that she was drinking. It was game day. That's not unpredictable. And it's not unpredictable in a city like Philadelphia for somebody who's had a little too much to make a bad decision. Members of the jury, just because that decision was bad doesn't mean it's something that the city doesn't have to prevent. And that brings us to our second fact. They did it. Members of the jury, they knew how to make those poles safe. All you had to do was grease them. And while that safety inspector, he can tell you that we had other ideas, we had other plans, they might have been more slippery, all you have to do is look at the numbers. In 2018, Greece, no injuries. 2022, Greece, no injuries. 2023, Greece, no injuries. Members of the jury, people only started getting hurt when they took away that grease. They had a decade of flawless service, and they threw it away. And that brings us to our third fact. They did it. Members of the jury, we know why. $10,000. That's a million and a half people in the city. You don't have to be a athlete to know that that's pennies on the dollar to protect our people. And that is not a good enough excuse to not put grease on those poles, but we know it saves lives. The defense, they come up here and they told you about all of the other protections that they put up. But let's actually take a moment and think about what they want you to believe. They kept talking about that barrier that got put up, that barrier that she crossed. Members of the jury, be honest. They're talking about a 3-foot fence when somebody has already decided to shimmy up a 20-foot pole. In what world is that going to stop them? That leap in logic, that's negligent. Look, at the end of this trial, you're going to go into a deliberation. You're going to see this verdict form. It's got a couple questions. It's going to ask you question 1, were any of these parties negligent? And if they did, it would work. Did any of them have a substantial cause in Mr. Farnsworth's harm? We're going to like Philadelphia. Yes. And now look, the defense, they keep telling you, well, Ms. Davidson, she was drinking. And we didn't try to hide the ball from you on that. That was a bad decision. So her name too. But there's a second question on this sheet, and it's asking you to divide up fault. So you look at Ms. Davidson's one bad decision at one time, and sure, it was not smart. It hurt somebody. But members of the jury, compare that to the active disregard of that one safety measure that kept people safe for a decade. Because of that, we're going to ask you to put no more than 30% next to Ms. Davidson. And because of their disregard for safety policy, just 2 weeks after somebody died in the exact same way, we'll ask you to write no less than 70% in safe. Because they saw the danger. And they didn't stop. Find more. Thank you. Counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed? May it please the court. Mr. Meyer, members of the jury. How many passes is a person supposed to get? Because when Lanny Davidson was celebrating in the city on February 9th, she saw the metal railing around that light pole and chose to climb over it. When she looked up at that over 15-foot pole, she chose to climb it. And even while her friend Sam was standing at the bottom of that pole, screaming at her not to step over that railing, she chose to do it anyway. Members of the jury, Lanny Davidson's decisions put her at the top of that pole, no one else's. Because today we learned that the city built barriers, but that she chose to ignore them. And that's a problem for Mr. Meyer and his company. Because today it was their responsibility to come in here and prove to you that it's more likely than not, proved by a preponderance of the evidence, that the city of Philadelphia didn't act with a reasonable degree of care during that Super Bowl celebration back in February. But members of the jury, they failed to meet that burden today, and let's talk about why. Because today you heard two key facts. First, that the city put up barriers. And second, that Laney Davidson chose to cross them. So let's take those one by one. Starting with the barriers that the city put up. Because today we called the director of public safety to the stand, Mr. Walker Edwards. And he told you himself about all of the preparation that went into making sure that that city was safe for every single resident that chose to celebrate. He told you that they added free public transportation, that they put up metal railings around the light poles to prevent people from climbing them. And he told you, and he saw that that grease wasn't happening, well, he stopped doing it. Members of the jury, those are the actions of the reasonable director of public safety. That's someone who cares about their position, who cares about the residents of the health. Now, all day today, Mr. Meyer has been saying that, well, they should have greased the poles. Had they greased the poles, well, Laney Davidson never would have climbed. Members of the jury, I want you to pay close attention to this video that we showed you during trial. This is back in 2022, when the city was greasing the poles. Members of the jury, ask yourselves, does this look like a person who's struggling to climb a pole? Does this look like a pole that's slippery that someone could fall off of? I expect the answer is no. Because Mr. Edwards told you himself that the number of people climbing that pole, even when it was greased, kept going up year after year after year. So he did what any reasonable director of public safety would do. He stopped going the unreliable method. He stopped greasing those. So the city put up barriers. Let's talk about who chose to cross them. Because today you heard from Laney Davidson, she took that stand and she told you herself that when she was standing at that metal railing, listening to her friends screaming at her not to cross over it, she chose to do it anyway. When she was standing at the bottom of that pole, listening to her friend telling her not to climb it, she chose to do it anyway. Now, just a moment ago, when Mr. Meyer stood before you, he said, well, we weren't hiding that Miss Davidson was under the influence. So let's talk about what they did. Because the reason that Miss Davidson was sitting in this chair today and not at our council table was because she struck a deal with Mr. Farnsworth's family before this trial. They originally named her as the defendant, said, we're blaming you. But then she paid them $1. She agreed to come in here and take the stand anyway. She agreed to testify for the plaintiff. So when you're asking yourselves, well, how credible can Laney Davidson actually be? Just remember what chair she was originally supposed to be sitting in during this trial. So members of the jury, let's talk about parts. Because like I told you earlier during trial in my opening statement, we pursued an affirmative defense, something called comparative negligence. That means that today it was our responsibility to prove that it was more likely than not that Laney Davidson didn't act with a reasonable degree of care towards herself during that celebration back in February. Now, members of the jury, I want to talk about Sam Farnsworth and Laney Davidson for a moment. Because both of them were the same age, saw the same thing back on that night in February, were under the same amount of influence. But you know what Sam Farnsworth did? He was screaming, don't climb that railing, don't climb that. Two people in the same position with the same information, but Laney Davidson chose to climb and Sam Farnsworth didn't. You get that verdict form when you're deliberating after this trial? Well, you can check no. Next to number one. Because the city put up barriers. But Lanny Davidson chose to cross them again and again. Members of the jury, no one in this room is going to tell you that what happened to Mr. Farnsworth wasn't a tragedy. It absolutely was. But just because Mr. Farnsworth died while the city was putting measures in place, doesn't mean he died because of the measures that they put in place. So when you go back to deliberate, think about the fact that it was Lanny Davidson who chose to cross that metal barricade. It was Lanny Davidson who chose to climb that pole. It was Lanny Davidson who chose to ignore the screams of her friend. And think about all of that. Confident you'll find the city of Philadelphia not liable. Because the city put up barriers, but Lanny Davidson chose to cross them. Thank you.
Any rebuttal?
Yes. Ms. Nelson just asked you a question. And I'm gonna ask it again. How many passes do they get? The jury, when talking about the city of Philadelphia, that answer is one. When you change just one thing about your safety protocol, and that one thing results in a death, in over 5 times the amount of people climbing up those poles, you're not allowed to make that mistake twice. But they saw the danger. And they didn't stop. Finally. Thank you.
All judges are filling out ballots and you stop. Zoom recording.
What?
Stop Zoom recordings.
Thank you.
Don't want to remind everyone the government attorney refers to people, the plaintiff.